Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm just going to try to really quickly preface the entire talk tonight with a quick geographical orientation and a very short history. I should say not short, but rapid history. So first, geographical context. We're talking about the Middle East. We're talking about a tiny sliver of land within the Eastern Mediterranean, also known as the Levant, but that's currently called Israel. What was it before then? So I have some maps here that kind of give a sense. 1878, the very first Zionist colony. But what was there at the time? What was this colony entering? Palestine was then a mixed society. Muslims, Christians, Jews, Druze, all living together in relatively peaceful coexistence. Some time photos. Then there's a gradual progress of more and more Zionist immigration. I should preface that, actually. Wanted to preface this a little bit with defining a couple of terms. The difference between Jewish, Israeli, and Zionist, because these words are going to be used a lot in this discussion. And we want to be very clear that these three things are very different and occasionally overlap, but they're totally separate, and we use each one with intention. Judaism is a religion and a culture and an ethnic heritage. Israeli is a citizenship of a particular country called Israel, and Zionism has many definitions, but it's basically a political ideology that Jews need a state of their own in order to be safe from the greater anti-Semitic world. I also want to be clear that throughout this talk, criticism and discussion of a state is not criticism and discussion of its people. That the people and the state are separate things. Okay, so continuing on, we have, with this slide, over the next few decades, major and minor Jewish settlements have been established throughout the region, and there's really generally only very minor friction just due to the difference between the local and the imported European expectations about how one goes about buying land. Then what you have is, at the end of World War I, the British Mandate. This is when the period where this region, I'm sorry, that map is not visible up there, but the British have control over the area. It's called the Mandate, and they facilitate the immigration of Jews from Europe, from Britain, into then Palestine. And there's a huge swell, of course, of that immigration due to the Second World War, the Holocaust, rising anti-Semitism. By 1945, Jews account for, by different estimates, between 31–33% of the population. Here's just a quick idea of where the population was roughly distributed between Palestinians, Zionist settlers, and others. And here's a quote from David Ben-Gurion, founder and first prime minister of Israel, that gives you an idea what the intentions were of the Zionist settlers by this point. They were pretty open about their intentions to expel the Arabs and claim the land for Judaism as the Jewish homeland. That was the Zionist ideology. That's the Zionist project when I refer to the Zionism. So here we have what by now to some of you might be a familiar set of maps showing the progression of the loss of land from 1946, pre-war, through the UN proposed division of land in 1947 to the declared state of Israel that existed between 49 and 67 until that war, and what we have now, which is a much fragmented West Bank and constrained Gaza. This is another interesting map I wanted to show that sort of just shows on the left, these are the Jewish-owned land in darker purple, and the beige area is again the UN designated or UN proposed partition plan between Jews and Palestinians from 47. On the right, you see all the little black dots are Palestinian villages that were depopulated and razed in 1948 and 67 by Israel in those two wars. And focusing on just the West Bank for a second, it's fragmented in a particular way in which most of it, 59%, is controlled civilly and militarily by Israel. 23% is under Palestinian control, but with Israeli military presence and control. And only 12%, the dark green areas, are where the West Bank is ostensibly under full Palestinian Authority control. However, the Israeli military can and does enter at will in those regions as well. What the West Bank now looks like is essentially dotted with settlements. Those settlements are connected by roads. The roads have checkpoints. It's actually an apartheid system of roads. There are roads that are just for the Jewish settlers and roads that are just for the Palestinians. They have different license plates. They're treated differently at checkpoints. This is why the term apartheid is appropriate. One reason, I should say. So that's my quick intro. Now I'm going to turn it over to Hani, who's going to tell you more about Gaza.
So we'll go on a brief definition of Gaza and the situation there. A quick background about Gaza. As you can see in that map, that's the map of Palestine that Jason was talking about, and the red small area is Gaza. Gaza has a population of 1.5 million people. It can fit into San Diego County about 29 times, so it's a very tiny place with borders 7 miles with Egypt and 32 miles with Israel. And as we indicated earlier, it's a very crowded place there. So what happened in Gaza, and like we've been hearing about it in the news, and so Gaza was under siege since 2007 up to now. In January 2006, Hamas was democratically elected to the Palestinian parliament, and Israel and the US refused to recognize Hamas's victory in that area. So in June of 2007, Hamas takes over the governmental control of Gaza after Fatah attempts an Israeli-supported coup. As a consequence of that, Israel, with the US support, tightened Gaza's siege, making the Palestinian Gazans prisoners in their own land. So that siege actually consists of land and the sea blockade. So it's a complete siege, and it's a small area to control, so it was very easy to control that area. That siege and with the Israeli army, actually, the Israeli army confiscates the humanitarian aid and the basic supplies that go into Gaza, causing the 1.5 million people there to be dependent completely on food aid. Very large, very high unemployment rate of 49%. 80% of the population are below the poverty line in Gaza. And there's a huge shortage of medical supply and construction material in Gaza. In 2009, the UN formed a fact-finding mission. The head of that fact-finding mission was the Judge Goldstone from South Africa. That fact-finding mission concluded that Israel had imposed a blockade amounting to collective punishment and carried out a systematic policy of progressive isolation and deprivation of the Gaza Strip. So it was well planned and executed. So in our trip, so we actually were part of the Viva Palestina convoy in December of last year, where we drove cars from, actually we drove 200 plus ambulances full of medical supplies and aid to Gaza. The convoy started from London through Europe, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, and into Egypt. And then we finally entered Gaza. Actually, I was not I was not able to enter Gaza at that time. I had to come back to the U.S. But the rest of the delegation and the convoy members were able to get into Gaza, and we have Faith over there. She was part of that convoy. So Faith was actually able to take some pictures. These pictures were in January of this year, and you can see like 2 years down the road after the attack on Gaza in 2008, the homes are still demolished there. I would like to stop here actually and talk a little bit about the Israeli attack on Gaza in December of 2008. We have a short video here that talks about that. that video actually was made by a Canadian group, hence the reference to the Canadian island. But you can see actually 1 year later after the attack, these pictures are taken by us, by the convoy members, and you can see like the destruction is still there, and no one can rebuild their home there because simply like there is no construction. So on the way out of Gaza, we actually met a person, his name is Anas. He gave testimony to Faith about an incident that happened to him. I'm gonna read this quickly. So this is Anas, the guy talking. He said, it happened in Al-Jalad Street in Gaza on January 15th, 2009. I woke up with the sound of explosions around me. Israeli F-16 warplanes were bombing all over Gaza again, but the sounds were closer this time. We were all terrified, and many of us ran out into the street, men, women, and children. One of the bombs being dropped from these planes hit a house in our neighborhood, and this is the picture of that house, and you can see how big that hole that happened out of that bomb. These planes hit a house in our neighborhood and completely destroyed it. All we could see was a big hole where the building had been. 15 people died, 3 men, 5 women, and 7 children. One of the children was my 6-month-old baby sister. Her name was Khadija, and she died from the toxic gases and smoke from the bomb. So these are like some of the children that died in that incident. So on the way out, Anas actually gave us a statement there that we will continue to challenge the occupation. What the occupation destroys, we will rebuild. They will not steal our joy. We will not lose hope from for our freedom. So as a continuation to the efforts to break the siege on Gaza, there was the flotilla that probably lots of us here heard about. The flotilla actually consisted of 6 boats. They came from different locations, from Ireland, Turkey, Greece, and there were lots of nationalities for the volunteers on these flotilla. Some of the pictures over there for the ships that actually went into Gaza. And we all know what happened, that these ships were actually stopped in international waters by the Israeli army. They were attacked there in the international waters. And 9 people, including 1 American citizen, they were killed in these flotillas by the Israeli army. And of course, like the Article 100 of the UN Convention for the law of the sea clearly describes this incident as a piracy. And these are some of the facts that for what happened on these ships. The content of the ships were confiscated by the Israeli army, and the people who were on the flotilla, including an ex-US ambassador and a survivor of the attack on the US Liberty, a veteran from the US, who survived the Israeli attack on the Liberty ship in the Mediterranean. They all were there, and all their belongings were also stolen by the Israeli army when they were there. And the response from our president is, I think we need to know what all the facts are. But the facts were very clear, and what happened was very clear actually. So with this, I'll end my part, and we'll go back to Jason so he can give us more about the flotilla reaction.
Yeah, as Bob introduced me, he said that I happened to be there in the West Bank when the flotilla massacre happened, just by chance. So, fortunately, I got to witness the reaction there by the Palestinian public, and I'd like to share a little bit of that with you. the very next day, I was able to be in Ramallah, which is one of the largest cities in the West Bank. And while I heard from my tour guide that morning that East Jerusalem was on total strike, the rest of the West Bank was conducting protests, and they were planning the strike for the following day. So we marched through the streets, and I want to play a little video for you here, just to show the size of this march. It was big. And I saw a lot of international solidarity groups there, you know, men, women, children, old, young. I mean, everybody was out for this protest, and it really did fill the streets. It seemed from the starting point in this city square that you see pictured at the top right, that was the initial rally, to this was the final rally out front of a Turkish consulate building in Ramallah, because Turkey, the Turkish organization IHH, the humanitarian organization, was one of the main sponsors of the flotilla. And so what the Palestinians told me there over and over again, I heard many of them say, you know, that they recognized that the flotilla was a gesture of the international community recognizing their human value and dignity, and that as Israel attacked that gesture, it attacked their human value and dignity. And they were immensely hurt by that, appalled, of course, sad for the internationals, the humanitarians who lost their lives in that act, and they were grateful. They were there to express their gratitude to the Turkish government for the steps that they were already taking against Israel at that time and the very next day. As I said, the day after that, basically the entire West Bank was on strike, and that night I was fortunate to be in the town of Sachnin, where there was another smaller protest organized by Palestinians that my delegation was able to join. So I wanted to take this opportunity then to discuss what the situation exactly is in the West Bank, where I was at that time, and where these Palestinians are living day to day. This is a map of the apartheid annexation wall, as it's now, I'd say, most frequently called by Palestinians. It's not a separation wall, as walls do anything but separate, but it's an apartheid annexation wall. It separates the people from each other, it separates them from their land, and it annexes land. It grabs the most prized areas for Israel by scooping deep into the West Bank territory, far from the Green Line, which was the sort of the original armistice line, 1967. Note also this large swath of white land on the right. I have a map up here if you want to get a closer look after the talk. But that's all basically settlers, settler cultivated land, and military closed regions. So it's almost completely shut off to Palestinians. And thus they are locked in these small enclaves separated from each other. I got to visit the border village of Bilaim. Well, I should say it wasn't near a border until the wall came through it and took 60% of its land. This is Iyad and his family. Tessahil is his wife, and Mayar is his daughter. He also has a son who's not pictured here. And he's part of the Popular Struggle Organizing Committee in Bilaim. Bilaim has become sort of a focal point, at least for the international attention to what's going on around the wall. It's just gotten a lot of media coverage, I'd say, because of the bravery and the creativity of the protests there. I want to show you what they did in response to the flotilla. They actually built their own ship and sailed it through the main street of their town and up to the border wall, where, of course, it was taken by Israeli soldiers, as you see in the lower right. But you know, this is very typical of what goes on in Bilaim. Very creative, nonviolent protests, week after week, every Friday. And there are some of those resources links to the Vilahin websites in the handout.